Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, August 13th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Oregon National Guard sends troops to Iraq and Syria. So the Oregon National Guard is sending off 230 guardsmen to Iraq and Syria amid soaring tensions in the Middle East, which, of course, we've been talking about a lot on this show. The U.S. has about 2,500 troops in Iraq and 900 occupying eastern Syria. This deployment is likely just a regular rotational deployment. I haven't seen anything of the U.S. saying that they're adding troops to Iraq and Syria. It's possible that they are, but as far as I know, this is just a rotational deployment. But I wanted to highlight this because this is the National Guard going to Iraq and Syria, two of the main hotspots right now where U.S. troops are at risk of being hurt or killed. We've seen U.S. troops in the past week get injured in both Iraq and Syria in rocket and drone attacks. And this unit is being deployed for a year and will serve as the primary artillery defenders for the U.S. and its partners in Iraq and Syria. The soldiers held a mobilization ceremony on Friday and were sent to Fort Sill in Oklahoma, where they will undergo training before actually being sent to Iraq and Syria. So it's not exactly clear how long that training will be, but the deployment is in the works. And the U.S. frequently deploys the National Guard to active conflicts in Iraq, Syria, and Somalia. So this is part of the reason why I wanted to cover this and make it the top story. It's a good way to promote the Defend the Guard Act. So there is a national movement in the United States seeking to remove the federal government's ability to deploy the National Guard to war zones through legislation at the state level. And this is the Defend the Guard Act. And the Defend the Guard Act would prohibit the federal government from deploying a state's National Guard to a conflict zone where Congress has not officially declared war, and that has not happened since World War II. The bill has passed through several state legislatures, but it hasn't become law in any states. I know it passed in New Hampshire and in Arizona, but it has yet to become law. But they're making a lot of progress with this, and this is something, if you want to get involved in anti-war activism, I think this is, one of the best things you can do, because this would seriously take some war-making powers away from the federal government. You can go to defendtheguard.us to see if the legislation has been introduced in your state. And I always put the link in the description of this show if you want to volunteer for phone banking with Defend the Guard. That's to help lobby state representatives to get on board with this legislation. Again, it's just with everything going on, I think it's important to highlight, if you look at this article, it's from the local NBC affiliate in Oregon. They interview some of the people that they're sending off to Syria and Iraq. One of them is a single mother who says she's leaving her only child behind. This is who we're sending off to war. And it might not seem like war to us, to Americans who don't really pay attention to this stuff. But again, right now, even forget what's happening with Iran and with the Shia militias attacking U.S. bases. There's actually been an uptick in ISIS attacks in Iraq and Syria. They've really been, benefited from the destabilization that has been caused by Israel's genocidal war in Gaza. The Shia militias in Iraq that the U.S. is fighting now, they are sworn enemies of ISIS. Actually, the PMF, the military unit that these Shia militias fall under, it was formed in 2014 to fight ISIS. So ISIS certainly benefits from all the different other fighting that's happening here. And ISIS has claimed responsibility for 153 attacks in Iraq and Syria this year. In July, U.S. Central Command said that it had participated in 196 missions against ISIS with partner forces in Iraq and Syria, which killed 44 suspected ISIS operatives. So that was in the first 6 months of 2024 that the U.S. was involved in 196 missions against ISIS. So these National Guard soldiers are going to be involved in that. But again, they're also engaged in battle with the Iraqi Shia militias and other forces that might want to attack U.S. bases. And just in the last week, as I said, U.S. troops have been injured in Iraq and Syria. And now we have this, we're expecting this big Iranian reprisal attack against Israel. If that happens, there's a chance that the Iraqi militias might join in on the attack, and that could involve attacks on U.S. troops because the U.S. is saying it's going to defend Israel. So that's why I think this defend the guard stuff is very important. Back in January, when 3 U.S. troops were killed at Tower 22, which is that secretive U.S. base in Jordan, the 3 troops who were killed were in the Army Reserves. They were from Georgia. But dozens, actually 41 members of the Arizona National Guard were wounded in that attack. And that actually inspired, I think her name is, I want to say Wendy Rogers. I might have her name wrong. But she's a state senator in Arizona, and that got them inspired to reintroduce the legislation. So hopefully this gets more traction. We get some people involved. I want to give credit to a guy named Ibra Tar. I might be pronouncing his last name wrong. Taher. He's an anti-war activist in Oregon, and he's involved with a group called Anti-War Oregon. If anybody's in Oregon and wants to get involved in some anti-war activism, that's definitely an organization to check out. But he brought it to my attention that the Oregon National Guard was heading to Iraq and Syria. And again, this is a normal thing, these rotational deployments, but I just think it's important to highlight when we're on the brink of this new major war in the Middle East. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. is prepared to defend Israel from a significant attack. The White House said Monday that the U.S. is preparing to defend Israel from a significant Iranian reprisal attack as the U.S. continues to bolster its forces in the region. The U.S. and Israel are expecting Iran to launch its response to the Israeli killing of Hamas's political chief, Ismail Haniyeh, in Tehran, and think the attack could happen this week. Iran's allies, including Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iraqi Shia militias, may participate in the operation. So this is John Kirby, the White House National Security Council spokesman. He said, quote, "We share the same concerns and expectations that our Israeli counterparts have with respect to the potential timing here. Could be this week. We have to be prepared for what could be a significant set of attacks," end quote. So the U.S. helped defend Israel when Iran launched its first ever attack on Israeli territory in April, which was provoked by the bombing of the Iranian consulate in Damascus, Syria. Kirby said, quote, "We obviously don't want to see Israel have to defend itself against another onslaught like they did in April. But if that's what comes at them, we will continue to help them defend themselves," end quote. So vowing to defend Israel yet again. So yesterday I went over that Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin spoke with the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. At the time, the Pentagon didn't release the readout of the call yet. They released it kind of late on Sunday night. And Austin gave some very strong assurances, and he told Gallant that the U.S. is accelerating the deployment of a U.S. aircraft carrier and that the U.S. is also sending a guided missile submarine to the region. The Pentagon said in a readout of that call, quote, "Secretary Austin reiterated the United States' commitment to take every possible step to defend Israel and noted the strengthening of U.S. military force posture and capabilities throughout the Middle East in light of escalating regional tensions," end quote. So again, he said the United States is committed to taking every possible step to defend Israel, every possible step, even if that means American soldiers being killed, I'm sure. And this comes, these new pledges from the U.S. comes after that poll from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs was published, and that found that the majority of Americans, 56%, oppose the idea of using U.S. troops to defend Israel from Iran. But that is not factored in to the Biden administration's thinking on this, of course. All right, so the next one here, the Saudis will not pay their bills for the U.S. fueling their warplanes. So this article is from Nick Turse at The Intercept. So this is a kind of a response to the U.S. Saying that it's going to start selling offensive weapons to the Saudis again. And so during the war in Yemen, I mean, there's still a war in Yemen, but when the Saudis were at war against the Houthis from 2015 to 2022, one of the ways that the U.S. supported that brutal war, which involved horrific bombings of civilians and civilian infrastructure and a starvation blockade, the U.S. was refueling Saudi warplanes. And apparently the Saudis still haven't paid their bills. I actually believe that so this is it dates from operations carried out between March 2015 and November 2018. At one point, the U.S. actually stopped refueling the Saudi planes as a way to say, it was the backlash from all the civilians being killed. I believe it was August 2018 when the Saudis bombed a school bus full of children and killed over 60 children. The U.S. said, all right, we'll stop fueling their planes. But at the time, the Saudis, were able to refuel their own planes, something that they couldn't do before. So it didn't really impact things too much, and they went on continuing to kill lots of civilians with U.S. weapons and intelligence and things like that. But the Saudis still owe the U.S. $15 million and apparently haven't paid it back. And he mentions that the Saudi royal family is reportedly worth more than $1.4 trillion. And they're also asking for a mutual defense treaty with the U.S. as part of any deal to normalize relations with Israel. That right now doesn't seem like it's going to happen anytime soon, though. All right, so the next one here, Gallant says that Netanyahu's goal in Gaza is nonsense. So on Monday, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant called Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's calls for total victory in Gaza nonsense, prompting a rebuke from Netanyahu. So Gallant made the comments at a hearing of the Israeli Knesset's Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee when asked why Israel hasn't invaded Lebanon. So he said, quote, "I hear the heroes beating the drums of war, the total victory and nonsense. I've seen this courage when it comes up for discussion. The conditions for war in Lebanon that exist today are the opposite of what they were at the beginning of the war," end quote. So what Gallant is saying, it's kind of a confusing, hard to understand exactly what he's saying there, but he also said in this hearing that he wanted to take action against Hezbollah at the beginning of Israel's operations in Gaza, right after October 7th, said that he wanted a preemptive strike. But he was denied. He said, quote, "There is a chance to attack the hive then, and now the terrorists are now swarming like bees," end quote. So saying that he wanted war in Lebanon right away, and that Netanyahu said no. So in response to Gallant's comments, Netanyahu's office accused the defense minister of adopting an anti-Israel narrative. The office said in a statement that Hamas was to blame for the lack of a ceasefire deal in Gaza, despite widespread acknowledgement that Netanyahu has been sabotaging the chances of an agreement. So this is Netanyahu's office, which said, quote, "When Gallant adopts the anti-Israeli narrative, he harms the chances of reaching a deal for the hostages. He should have criticized Sinwar, who refused to send a delegation for negotiations and remains the only obstacle to a hostage deal," end quote. That's not true. Obviously, Netanyahu has been a major obstacle to a hostage deal. Gallant and other top Israeli military and security officials favor a ceasefire in Gaza, but only a temporary one. And one of the reasons why they want a ceasefire in Gaza is so they can prepare their military for war in Lebanon. Gallant is basically saying the conditions right now, aren't right for Israel to launch a big war in Lebanon. Netanyahu and Gallant have been at odds throughout this whole thing, basically, and he's kind of, he's the preferred official, Gallant is, for the U.S. to deal with. It seems like they like dealing with him more. He visited Washington a few times, more than Netanyahu has, I believe. He just had that one big visit. So Israeli official told Haaretz, quote, in contrast with the prime minister, the defense minister enjoys the trust of the American administration and is considered the voice of reason against Netanyahu, who is seen as someone who makes decisions that are meant to support his personal survival, end quote. So now, remember what Gallant was just saying, that he wanted war in Lebanon right away. This is, the moderate opposition to Netanyahu. And he's also often cited, I would say the most, when it comes to examples of genocidal rhetoric from Israeli officials. On October 9th, 2 days after October 7th, he came out and announced a complete siege on Gaza. They're cutting off all the water, fuel, food, and said that the military was fighting human animals. And more than half, a million, over a million children live in Gaza. Now, about 15,000 at least have been killed, and tens of thousands of others have been wounded and maimed. All right, so the next one here, Hamas says that its guards killed an Israeli hostage and wounded 2 others. So Hamas's military wing, the Al-Qassam brigades, said Monday that 1 Israeli hostage in Gaza was killed and 2 others were wounded in 2 separate incidents involving Hamas guards. Abu Obaida, Al-Qassam's spokesman, said 2 Hamas recruits fatally shot 1 male hostage and 2 females were wounded. Obaida said that attempts are being made to save the lives of the 2 women who were wounded. He added that a committee was formed to investigate the shootings. He said that he blamed it on Israeli massacres and the resulting reactions. So maybe hinting there that the Hamas guards took out their anger at Israel on these hostages. Israeli officials said that they don't have the intelligence to confirm or deny the statement from Hamas. And this is the first time that Hamas has said that its guards killed an Israeli hostage inside Gaza. Many Israeli captives have died since being taken into the Strip by Hamas fighters on October 7th. But they were likely killed by Israeli bombings or just the conditions in Gaza, the lack of food shortages, medicine shortages. At least 3 Israeli hostages were gunned down by Israeli forces while waving a white flag. And this is why Netanyahu's been under a lot of domestic pressure to reach a hostage deal, because as this thing goes on, more and more continue to be killed. And it is in Hamas's interest to keep them alive as leverage. So it is likely that most of the Israeli hostages who have died in Gaza since October 7th died because of Israeli airstrikes. All right, so the next one here, the Fajr massacre, Palestinians collect bags of human remains. So this article is from Mondo Weiss. I mentioned this yesterday. I wanted just to hold this story just to kind of keep this in the news, this massacre, this Israeli bombing of the school over the weekend. And this is a long story, but it's accounts from Palestinians who were there, who were on the ground, and people who lost family members. And essentially, some of them, they couldn't find intact bodies. So rescue workers and people that were clearing the area handed them bags of body parts. If they weighed 70 kilograms and they counted that as one person dead, they gave it to a family to go bury. And children, I believe that the bags were lighter. One Palestinian who was looking for his son, who was only 6 years old, was handed a plastic bag containing 18 kilograms of human rights and was told, this is your son, go bury him. And his name is Hassan Ahmad, whose son was killed. He told Mondo Weiss, quote, I don't know if this is my son or not. I don't know what I'm carrying in this bag. They said he's my son, and I don't know anything, and I don't see anything of my son in this bag, end quote. So just really horrific. The next account here is from a Palestinian woman who was collecting her husband's body parts into a bag. All right, so the next one here, nearly 2% of Gaza's population killed by the U.S.-Israel war machine. This article is from The Cradle. Nearly 2% of the Gaza Strip's entire population has been killed by Israel during its genocidal war on the Strip, according to figures released on August 11th by the Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics. The Bureau said in a statement that Israel's war on Gaza has killed more than 39,000 Palestinians, and that's about 1.8% of the population. And that's the number that does not take into account the Palestinians who are missing under the rubble, presumed to be dead, which is they say is about 10,000. And of course, there's other deaths that probably haven't been counted as well. So it's what's considered now like the lower estimate, and that's about 2% of the whole population of Gaza. Just a complete slaughter. All right, so the next one here, Senator Lindsey Graham calls Ukraine's Kursk invasion beautiful. So Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, visited the Ukrainian capital of Kiev on Monday and praised the Ukrainian incursion into Russia's Kursk Oblast, calling the offensive beautiful. Speaking to reporters alongside Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, Graham said, quote, "What do I think about Kursk? Bold, brilliant, beautiful. Keep it up," end quote. So the White House has insisted it was unaware, the U.S. is saying it was unaware of Ukraine's plans to launch this ground incursion into Kursk, but the U.S. is strongly backing the invasion by allowing Ukraine to use U.S.-provided weapons. That comes with intelligence. If they're using U.S. missiles and things like that, that means the U.S. is providing them with intelligence as well. Graham added that his message to the Biden administration is to give Ukraine the weapons that they want, the weapons they need, as he puts it. And so he met with Zelensky, him and Blumenthal. And so we have the U.S. saying, the Pentagon saying that Ukraine can use U.S. weapons inside Russia, but they still say that they oppose long-range strikes, which they haven't clearly defined. But Graham and Zelensky are saying, let us do the long-range strikes. Zelensky said in his nightly address after meeting with Graham and Blumenthal, quote, "We discussed what exactly is needed to bring this war to its end and to bring it to a just end. I explained in detail our need for long-range capabilities," end quote. So the U.S.-backed incursion into Kursk, of course, is a big escalation of the proxy war. It risks a major Russian response. Putin is blaming it on Ukraine's Western backers, and when you have Lindsey Graham going over there and saying these things, it certainly makes it look like they are the ones behind it. All right, so the next one here, Putin says that Ukraine's Kursk offensive is to gain leverage for peace talks. So Russian President Vladimir Putin said Monday that Ukraine launched its invasion of Kursk with Western backing to gain leverage for future negotiations. He said it was clear why Ukraine refused Russia's recent proposals. Putin said, quote, "The enemy, with the help of its Western masters, it is doing their bidding, and the West is waging war against us using Ukrainians, seeks to improve its negotiating position in the future," end quote. The U.S. claims that it was unaware. As I just mentioned, the U.S. says they weren't aware of these plans, but they're supporting it anyway. Putin also appeared to say that he was ruling out negotiations with Ukraine. He said, quote, "But what kind of negotiations can we even talk about with people who indiscriminately strike civilians, civilian infrastructure, or try to create threats to nuclear power facilities? What can we even talk about with them?" End quote. So a Ukrainian soldier named Denis, who spoke to the Financial Times, also said the purpose of the invasion was for negotiations. He said, quote, "We can fight here and take their territory, and then negotiations can start, and we will have some land of theirs to trade for our land," end quote. He also acknowledged that diverting troops for the Kursk invasion could lead to Russia capturing more towns in Donetsk, where Russian forces have been making steady gains, and that has continued even with this Kursk invasion. Also on Monday, Ukraine's commander-in-chief claimed that his forces were now controlling 386 square miles of territory in Kursk. Not sure if that's exactly right, but they did capture quite a few villages. The Russian Defense Ministry says that it has stopped a major breakthrough and that they're working on clearing the area out. It does look like Ukraine is taking very heavy losses there, so not clear if they're going to be able to really bounce back from that. But it's been almost a week now of fighting in Kursk, and it looked like Ukraine tried to also go into Belgorod on Monday, but that was repelled. All right, so the next one here, over 1,000 women and children arrested in the West Bank since October 7th. This article is from The Cradle. Israeli forces have made 10,000 arrests across the occupied West Bank and Jerusalem since the start of the war on Gaza, according to a brief released by several Palestinian prisoner organizations on August 12th. And included in that 10,000 is 345 women and 700 children. So that is a lot, and this is part of living under military occupation, is that the Israeli military can detain people for, whenever they want, for any reason that they want. And there's also over 500 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since October 7th. I think the number might be over 600 now, but that's death, killed by the Israeli military as well as Israeli settlers. All right, so the next one here, Taiwan to mount missile defense drills off its east coast. This article is from the South China Morning Post. And it says Taiwan will test its ability to defend its east coast with a series of missile drills later this month. As the mainland's People's Liberation Army sends more warplanes and ships near the island, the Taiwanese Air Forces plan to mount live fire exercises with a restricted zone off the coast of Taitung from August 27th to the 29th, according to Taiwan's Fisheries Agency. The exercises will be followed by another series in the first week of September as part of annual air-to-air fighting drills. The agency warned other aircraft and vessels to avoid the restricted areas during that period. The Taiwanese Navy will also conduct sea-launched missile drills from August 20th to the 23rd. So Taiwan's doing some big drills. There's just been a lot of military activity in this area. Just something kind of to keep an eye on to understand that tensions are still very high with China and Taiwan. And of course, the U.S. is very involved in all of this. All right, so the last story here. The U.S. says it will drop charges against Maduro if he leaves power. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So the Biden administration is pushing for Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro to resign in exchange for him receiving amnesty from U.S. drug charges. So Washington recently contested the Venezuelan presidential election. They're claiming that the opposition leader actually won. The election results showed that Maduro won. The opposition, claimed that was there was some election fraud, and the U.S. is backing the opposition. Not a surprise, same old story, the U.S. trying to push regime change in Venezuela. And according to the Wall Street Journal, they said that the White House is willing to pardon Maduro and other top Venezuelan officials and agree not to seek extradition to the U.S. on drug trafficking charges. I'm sure Maduro is not going to go for this, but it was in 2020 that the U.S. indicted Maduro, calling him, accusing him of being a narco, on drug charges, and they put a $15 million bounty for his arrest. I remember at the time reading about how, the vast majority of the drugs went through not Venezuela, but other countries, Colombia, places where, the U.S. is allied with the government. But this was just a way to try to put extra pressure on Maduro when they unsealed this indictment. That's how they justified the invasion of Panama back when they took out Noriega, the former CIA asset. So this is something apparently the U.S. is offering Maduro. I think that there might be some back channel talks going on between the U.S. and the Maduro government. But we'll see. I think they're just going to continue this failed sanctions and regime change policy. All right, that's it for the news. Please go check out our Viewpoints. One from Edward Hasbrook. Realists think we need to prepare for a draft so we can win a war with China. One from Judge Napolitano. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the problem of torture. One from Ramzi Baroud. Zionism on the brink. Gaza war beyond Netanyahu. One from Slavisa Miličić. A new war threatens Bosnia and Herzegovina. And one from Ramzi Baroud, Zionism on the brink, Gaza war beyond Netanyahu. One from Aaron Sobstock, AIPAC had some recent wins, but it is not invincible. So please go check all of that out. You can support this show by sharing it. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Like and subscribe on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, wherever you prefer to watch. You could comment. I appreciate everyone that does, everyone who engages. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.